Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're back this week. We took last week off. Glad to be back. And we've got episode 147. And just want to remind everyone that joins us to be sure and let us know where you're joining from. And we always like to hear your comments and questions as we go along. So, Anton, you want to open us up for today?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Whether you're joining live or later in the recording, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're joining from. Kevin will give you a shout out as during the episode. Today, we're going to be talking about AI, open AI. I'm sure you've heard of ChatGPT and a few other things. And a little disclaimer before we jump in, Kevin and I are by no means an expert in this. We are not here to tell you how to use it or, tips and tricks. There's plenty of that on LinkedIn right now. Seems like everybody's an expert these days. But what I think we're not talking a whole lot about is how is this going to impact human beings? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it somewhere in the middle? It depends. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you think around how this will impact human beings, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be during their, life or in society in general. But Kev, I'll share my perspective after you, but I just want to see what your experience with OpenAI has been, if you've had any.
Well, I mean, with any technology, including AI, there are some benefits there available to us, and that um, it's can be very valuable and helpful. The challenge is that there are consequences or byproducts of any of this that are going to impact us, or not going to, but have already started impacting us, and that we are really dealing with, and it's creating stress for us, whether it's indirect or direct. And so it's something we've got to consider. And I hope that we're going to really be more thoughtful about this than some of the other advances that we've had occur in other areas. One I think of most is medical, because we didn't consider some of the implications of the technology and so-called advances. And now we're dealing with consequences that we never thought about. And I think we've got the same kind of scenario with AI. And we really need to slow things down a little bit and really be more thoughtful and have a lot more conversation in and around this. So it's kind of where my head's at in it. Welcome, Rick. Glad to have you. Hadn't seen you in a while. Good to have you this morning.
That makes sense. And if you folks, if you're joining, we're gonna keep reminding you that we're talking about OpenAI and just your thoughts on it, right? No need to be an expert, just what you think about it in general. For me, part of me is very excited, right? Part of me is going, there's really cool things that we can do, and even I can do, because it is that simple. I've played around with Chat GPT and I've gone on some rabbit holes and testing my own knowledge and using AI to kind of probe and poke at some health things. I did a lot of research on stress management and how things connect, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. One of my favorite parts about it is being able to ask follow-up questions, right? Instead of just getting, articles that you have to read through. Based on the information that is provided so far, I can ask more clarity, I can ask deeper dive, I can get more specific in certain things. It is really cool. Now, on the other hand, I am worried about jobs, right? Like, some people are like, oh, don't worry about jobs, it'll be fine. You know what the most common thing I hear about job loss from people? Well, this thing's going to create jobs for, more jobs in a way. And I'm going, well, in order to get there, somebody's going to have to lose their job. A human being is going to have to experience job loss and all the negative feelings and stress that comes from it, and potentially reskill and be able to move into another field. Sure. So from a global standpoint, economically, probably not going to be a net loss. I don't know enough, but I'm just saying if that's an argument.
Mm-hmm.
But it will be a loss on an individual level, and people will suffer. And anytime that's happening, to me, that's a big deal, and that's a negative. So I am a bit torn, because like even the other day, I was I am, Kevin, I'm sure you know, I'm not a coder. I don't write code. Uh,
Right.
but I actually used OpenAI to write some code for a website, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty easy. And I'm wondering, how many other things can it do that people that are freelancers right now, I think freelancers are really going to be impacted by this. How many of those things are going to take away somebody's job?
Yeah. Again, we tend to get excited about new capabilities, new technologies, and all that because of what they can do. But we too often don't consider what they are going to cause and how they're going to impact us. And this is usually some things that aren't going to show up immediately, that they're going to show up down the road, and the implications of that, the consequences of it. And so we really just, I don't know. And theoretically, it's going to give us more capacity to do ourselves when right now most of us are at overcapacity trying to do things, and just something else that's going to either literally or figuratively give us something else to do is I don't know, it's a bit troubling. Rick makes a comment and that we're slowly killing our ability to communicate face to face. You got to keep it in perspective. Interesting technology, but dangerous. Yeah, the idea of being able to communicate digitally in a different way or even more effective way, but spending less time really with people, there are going to be implications of that. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic with all the lockdown and things. Isolation is going to create its own challenges. And this is just, some of this will just accommodate that as a possibility. And I'm with Rick. I think it's a bit scary. And then Rick makes another comment that this will really hurt the lower class who hold lower skilled jobs. I agree with Anton. Um, yeah,
It's combining the two for me that's really interesting, right? You're mentioning human interaction and you're mentioning lower skilled jobs. And I think about a gas station attendant, right?
mm-hmm,
Somebody that somebody that we tend to go to similar gas stations within our location. So you sometimes build
right.
these relationships, and these are small little interactions, and they don't seem like a lot, but they are important, and they do add value to our life. And the thing is, like, some people say, well, what about introverts? And this is something that I always think about. Like, what about introverts? They have a hard time interacting. They'd prefer a robot. If all we do is make people comfortable all day, every day, in the long run, it can't help them. Like,
Right.
even introverts need a little bit of those interactions because chances are they're not going to get a whole lot of them else anywhere in life. So for them just to have a little bit of that is going to be important. It's one of those big things that we may not be looking at and going, wow, people that are introverted usually are in jobs that don't require a lot of communication with others. So all these little interactions within lower skilled jobs are going to go away potentially, right? Like I saw that McDonald's is investing in OpenAI and potentially going to have order takers that are AI instead of humans, and just all of that stuff, that extra smile, all those things that we
Mm-hmm.
get right now, we're not going to have. And I think that once again, long term ramifications are we don't know what's going to happen.
And I don't think we're considering them. That's what's even scarier. We're just, like we do a lot of this, we just look at it and go, oh, this is all good stuff. Well, maybe not. Welcome, Dave. Glad to have you with us. Appreciate you joining. Dave's got a comment. Says, good morning. I find Chat GPT and Bard are not very accurate when they provide data and cite a source. On multiple occasions, I have not been able to get confirmation of the origin. When I continue to ask the AI for clarification, they both eventually come back and say they were in error in the source material. Yeah, it's well, even, and I'm going to dating myself a little bit here, is using the Google or Siri apps, the voice recognition and all, and you ask a question that a human would at least have some grasp of. And yet, when the response for Google or Siri is, well, I don't understand what you want, or something like that. And I appreciate that some of the more advanced technologies overcoming that, but there is still a component that a human provides that I am of the opinion that none of this will replace. It won't happen because uh, what I was thinking about this the other day, that these technologies function on a knowledge level, and then on some level some experience, but even that has to be the experience of the programmer involved. But what technology and AI and all that are incapable of is the concept of wisdom and seeing things in a larger perspective, and involving outside of knowledge and outside of understanding. And I think that's a challenge that people need to ask the question of, are we going to begin to depend on this? And as Dave mentions, depend on the accuracy of it. And will it lead us down a path that's kind of scary?
See our audience kind of growing. Folks, if you're just joining, would love your comments on how you think OpenAI is going to impact society, impact human beings, maybe perhaps what jobs you see are in danger based on that. So would love to see your comments flowing in. Yeah, it may not be accurate, and I get that, but this is the part that I will defend it a little bit and say it's new. And they will overcome a lot of the accuracy challenges. I mean, the amount of growth that thing has had in 5 years is astronomical, and it learns, right? It's machine learning technology, so that'll keep getting better. The interesting thing, I keep testing. There's a article that I saw, or a post, I don't know,
Yeah.
and it said, "Ask OpenAI who owns Twitter." It's not Elon Musk. Like it still thinks that transaction never happened. So like maybe the databases haven't been updated and a few things that are still outdated, but I'm fully confident that will, be overcome in a very short amount of time. But it's can't rely on it, right? You can't just trust whatever it says. That's a really good point.
Well, and again, because there's a component beyond knowledge, facts, figures, data, and even experiential learning. There's a component beyond that can't be replicated, and that's the problem that we begin to see happening. And Rick makes an interesting question. Will we see some progressive churches move to AI? Says that's scary. Again, where do we draw the line? And how do we discern what of this is reliable, what's not? What considerations are going into it? I mean, I may be ignorant of how it's done, but at some point, the influence of the coder or designer is going to be felt. And what are the biases that are going to be built into it based on that? Even though, I'm sure there are the people involved and they're trying to do it without any biases or things like that, but that's near impossible. Mm-hmm. So what are those biases and impacts going to be like down the road?
That's a really good point, Kev. Like bias, it learns bias. We know that it learns bias because it learns information written by people with bias. So it's really, really hard to take it out. And there's a lot more content out there that is older, right? That it's learning from, that has way more bias than maybe the recent content. So it's scary to think, like, if we rely on things on AI with bias, we have to really pay attention. So that's the whole point of, like, AI will have a lot of jobs. There will be people scanning it for bias and adjusting things and doing all that kind of stuff. But to think that churches would be that way, I mean, I'm sure somebody will be crazy enough to do it, and somebody will be crazy enough to go. I mean, that's there's always some sector of the world that'll lean that way, but I hope not. I mean, that to me that would be the worst. Like, I mean, church is a place of community, and like you just going completely away from that to a robot. Yeah, but
Well,
hey,
and
it happened.
it, yeah, it's more than just learning a lesson. You may be able to use AI or GPT, those technologies to communicate information. But communication, especially in that environment, is much more than just the expression of words and sentences and information. There is a different connection at a different level that I still maintain AI and technologies will never have those capabilities. There, we can create data and processing and so on, like we have computers, but we're never going to replicate human spirit or replicate human conscience, not as we have it with the capability of making judgments and having making decisions to even change, because we can, as a human, we can deal with data and without any other inputs be able to make a judgment as to the value of that data and the moral implications of that data. Whereas I've not seen any kind of technology, hum, uh, um, computer learning, any of that has that capability, because I don't believe that we have the capability to reproduce that. And that's the downside to some of these capabilities. And I think about some of the sci-fi movies we've seen where we create these robots and all that, and then at some point they determine to take over the world, so to speak. And it seems a bit far-fetched, but certainly if you have uh, computer learning and these technologies develop to a point where they have artificial capability of thinking, but do so without any moral, spiritual inputs that are naturally built in, I can see where that goes real bad real quick. Uh, Welcome, Sharon. Glad to have you with us. Late's okay. Love to hear your thoughts on the topic of AI and the implications of it. And I find it interesting. We have been predicting for, wow, 20 plus years the impact of robotics, and that it was just going to destroy the workplace and take all the jobs away. I don't I don't think it's happened. Am I missing something there, Anton? Has it been this major issue that we were originally told?
I mean, it did. I think it did impact. Robotics impacted more of the factory type workers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like there definitely was an impact. But the thing is, it was a much slower impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
What concerns me, and I think should concern everybody, is how fast we're moving with AI. And I posted an article a while ago. Me and Kev talked about it yesterday. But even Elon Musk, the king of tech, right? He is asking people to stop developing this for 6 months. Like, let us catch up. This whole Moore's law, where technology doubles in every 18 months, we threw that out the window.
Yeah.
Technology is moving at an astronomical pace. That was fast, but now it's going a lot faster. And that's the part that makes me go, okay, we got to see some outcomes first before we continue to deep dive into this and really just spend time even brainstorming, even thinking, like breathe a little bit and look into the future. What is AI doing and what is it going to do? And I'm not talking about from take over the world standpoint, which I'm sure that's still a possibility, but just more from impact, like actual impacts that can
Mm-hmm.
be unforeseen consequences of doing things the way that we're doing them right now. So that's really the difference, is it's how fast this is growing.
Well, the one thing that was, because I've been a kind of a nerdy, geeky guy with technology for a long time. And one of the things that has been a cause effect situation was originally when we first developed computers, the programming, design, and coding was all done by humans. And we're talking tables spread out and multiple people and flow charts. And it was a manual process that involved humans considering all the different possibilities and then designing it accordingly. And what has happened is now the very computers that we developed have become a part of the design and production process. And that's why that it with each advancement that the speed increases and also the capability of what we have first out versus originally. Original computers first out were very basic, and they were, the first computers. And I know a lot of people now can't imagine this, but the first DOS based computers were very simplistic. You could only run one program at a time, and it took a lot of different inputs and things. And so, even like file structure, being able to name a file, you couldn't just write a name or a phrase for a name of a file. You had to follow certain files uh, commands and things like that. So part of the reason it's advancing is the very technology that we're working on has become a part of the design and production process. And that's why it's speeding up so quickly. And like you said, Anton, taking the time to go, okay, before we keep growing this without knowing the implications or considering it, we need to take a deep breath here. We need to slow it down and uh, consider the outcomes. And we're talking moral, ethical questions. I give you an example where the technology is again a plus and a minus, and that's in the construction industry. One of the technologies that has come along is called building information modeling, and it has the potential to save a lot of money and maybe time and effort through design processes. The challenge is, and part of the reason it hasn't gone full bore, if you will, or heavily adopted, is because it blurred the lines of responsibility from a legal and moral standpoint. Original process, you had architects and engineers work together to design a building. Then once they had completed and that had been approved and everybody signed off, they would hand off that design to a contractor who would then take responsibility for building it. And when they did the handoff, the responsibility went from the architects, engineers to the contractor. Well, with the building information modeling, because two things. One, original inputs is more than just from architect and engineer, because all of the different levels of involvement from a construction standpoint have inputs into the design. Then, when it comes time to build, you're on a digital basis, you're making changes along the way, which in the past, if you were going to make a change, you had to write it, you had to document it, and so on. So the moral and legal responsibilities became blurred. With these developments, where do the moral and legal responsibilities fall? The ethical questions. If the there's a mistake. We talked about the accuracy of the AI. If there's a mistake made because of inaccuracy and someone gets hurt, where does that fall ethically, morally, legally, in from a responsibility standpoint? And so the implications are quite remarkable. Let's
I
see.
like I like where you're taking this, Kev, because as you know, the show is all about human sustainability and making sure that we're taking care of humans in society. And the concept of sustainability was created from the planet standpoint, right? We used cheaper fuels to perhaps create a lot of carbon dioxide and things like that that potentially damage their planet. And the same thing could be happening right now, right? Because of cost pressures, there's a few catalysts that are happening at the same time that I'm afraid that they converge. It's going to be a really bad thing that's going to happen. We're facing a recession, and it's not just a local recession within a country. We're facing a global recession, really.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, you give this tool that can potentially cut a lot of costs because you can reduce lower labor, you can get rid of customer service, you can get rid of just so many different people jobs very quickly. And I'm trying to make a parallel here to the same thing that happened with the planet. Just
Mm-hmm.
because you can and it's cheaper doesn't mean you should. At some point, somebody has to intervene, governments, people, somebody has to step in and say, we can't do that to the human beings, just like we can't do certain things to the planet. It's just not sustainable. We can't sustain that our population if they don't have jobs, because then what happens? Well, then they go and they rely on the government. Well, then what happens? The government eventually runs out of money, and then countries collapse. And I'm being a little catastrophic right now, but that could very easily play out and very, very quickly because we're just moving at such a rapid pace and we're not considering morality. We're considering cost cutting and efficiency over
Yep.
morality.
And your statement that you just made is a key statement. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And with a lot of these technologies, we throw that out. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. And that is a core challenge with any of this going on. I'm trying to think, we can make faster vehicles that could be used for average drivers. Is that smart? And so we're not asking those kinds of questions in regards to AI and these technologies. Just because we can, should we? And that's such a key part that has to be considered.
I think that needs to be a topic for your wisdom seeker, man. It
Yeah,
sounds like a you conversation.
yeah, it really is, and part of the reason I think that we're have gotten where we are is that we've abandoned the concept, the principles of wisdom, and we decided several decades ago we were going to be a knowledge-based society, and the byproduct of that decision is that we have, not from a knowledge standpoint, not from an education standpoint, but from a practical standpoint, we have become a dumbed down culture. That we complain we don't have common sense, and that when we abandon the principles of wisdom and making wisdom a priority, we're seeing the byproducts of it. I mean, there's other factors, but that is certainly a big one. Um, let's see here. Rick asked an interesting question, and that is, did we speed up AI with the reduction of the workforce from COVID? Thoughts on that one, Anton?
I think we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and how COVID, some of the things that we're doing coming out of COVID, is not a response to protect people. I think that organizations did things because they were worried about protecting themselves, but it made it look like it was about people, right? Like finding ways to work from home and how fast that was implemented and how fast it's going away. It was about maintaining operation. So perhaps this is a push towards how do we maintain operation in more unpredictable environments, right? It's not necessarily just COVID. It's the world never seen such level of unpredictability. And for business, that's very, very bad. So this could be very much, Rick, a response to how do we create, sustained performance, sustained operations in an unpredictable world.
Yeah, I would agree. It is AI potentially takes humans out of the equation on a lot of levels, not just about jobs. Okay. And what happened with COVID and the pandemic took human consideration out of a lot of things. We got down to physical survival over everything else, and that will feed AI because it's about survival without consideration with the human. And that's scary because at the end of the day, we're still human and we still have human needs. It doesn't matter what we produce or do or whatever. The human needs, if they're not addressed, create the unsustainable situation we talk about. And we see it in some of our environmental decisions. And I think that a great example of not considering the implications of our choices and priorities is in the medical community. We're to a point medically that someone can be sustained physically for years, but to what end? And is that by itself what we want? Just because we can mechanically keep a body alive, is that what the goal is? And now, as a result, having even faced this for myself with my father, we get to a point now we're, as family and as humans, being forced to make decisions about whether someone it remains alive. Now, the question of alive brings into whole other ethical questions, but these are the kind of implications that if we don't consider with AI and even in the robotics areas, we're going to be in a real pickle at some point. And with how fast this stuff is moving, that pickle may come a lot quicker than it did in the past. Let's see. Sharon's got a comment. She says, I remember that very well. I worked with the programmers and I learned to code at that time. We did everything on the computer. I worked for AT&T then. So yeah, the speed of development has changed because of the technology that is already there. And as we create newer technologies and bring it in to part of the process, it speeds things up just remarkably. So I have to agree with Elon Musk. We need to take a breath and we need to slow the train down a bit and say, what are the long-term implications of this? And I think your suggestion, Anton, a collective brainstorming, and I think it needs to involve more than just the developers and programmers, and the coders, because the challenge with any of us when we're involved in a project or overcoming an obstacle, we have a limited scope. We're very focused on what we're doing, but we don't get outside inputs into it for the bigger picture. And with this, if we don't get more people engaged in having the conversation and brainstorming about these implications, I think we're going to get to a place quickly that we don't need to be.
I think part of it is educating the average public on AI in general, because right now it's seen as a search engine for the most part, right? That's what it's a replacement of a search engine that tells me answers better than, what Google did or whatever. It may, for some, seen as like, oh, it's a thing for me to edit the videos and pictures and things like that. Like, great. But the big ones is kind of going back to Rick's comment of lower class jobs, and not necessarily even lower class jobs, because this can go into higher level stuff, but just think about how many people in the world are in customer service jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Then think about how many of those customer service jobs have been outsourced to cheaper areas like
Mm-hmm.
India and all these people. Okay. Now think about what amount of population in India is currently doing customer service like jobs. It's super high. It's insane, at least from what I see all the time. And if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's from there, please correct me. But some sort of call center, some sort of customer service, some sort of customer contact. Well, guess what? It's not just a chat bot. It's going to be something that is more humanized, and it's going to be a talking kiosk type of thing, right? Not just taking orders, but being able to hear a customer's problem and then being able to use all the data that it has to provide a solution. I'm sure at some point it'll be able to monitor and see how that problem is being solved, stay on top of people, sending reminders, almost like a project manager, not so lower class anymore. Like the
Right.
threat here is really big. And I'm just going back to what happens to all those people. What happens? Because we've seen the pattern go from, okay, maybe the customer experience is not as good if we're switching from a native speaker to a non-native speaker, but the cost is great. The cost saving is great. So we went and pulled that lever, and we kept pulling it and pulling it and pulling it as much as we can. Well, now we have another lever. And if we look at precedent of what I just talked about, companies are going to pull that other lever really, really quickly. And there's so much at stake here.
Well, and as we're going through a time of inflation and cost increases and so on, it's going to put pressure in that regard as well. And what's scary to think about, okay, and one of my pet peeves today is customer service is horrible, just about everywhere. And as I look back at the evolution of customer service and how it's handled, and then I think, okay, so we're going to somehow replace this with AI. It really scares me because originally customer service was an individual that was given certain parameters and certain power to make a customer happy. Short version. Okay. They would be allowed to give a discount, refunds, whatever. And they can make those decisions. And those decisions are not one size fits all. There is not a policy book or a policy manual that out there that will cover every situation that arises. So what happened was that for various reasons, the people that were in customer service began to lack the insight and judgment to make good choices. So companies, because customer service became expensive, went to a process of scripting customer service responses. And if you don't believe it, you go, some companies you call, I have literally been on a customer service call and hear the pages of the book turning where the person is reading from the manual and their answers are scripted. So, and then in that process, it also removed the authority of people to make choices to provide the right kind of customer service response on an individualized basis. Well, AI and those capabilities are going to be driven by these manuals, by data and information, and there will be less judgment available and likely less authority to satisfy customers' needs and the human component of customer service. So we think customer service is bad now. Just wait. If we continue to grow these AI capabilities and implement them in customer service, which is one of the ones that is on the target, customer service is going to get deplorable. And we'll get, most of us now, we are so frustrated. We call to deal with someone, we get a computer. And and I've seen comedy sketches, and I've done this myself. It's to a point now you call in and everybody's screaming into the phone, representative, because we want to talk to a human, and it's only going to get worse. And that's the lesser of the possible implications that are a problem.
It's, and I'm going to take a slightly different angle on this. I think that AI has the ability to give answers faster than humans within that
Sure.
scope soon. Once we feed it enough data, once it knows enough stuff, great. That's not the main thing about customer service.
No.
One of the biggest things about customer service, and I've done a lot of customer service training for people over my years, back when I was in the health and wellness space, it's not about just solving my problem. It's acknowledging you messed up. It's acknowledging you've created a bad experience for me as a human. That cannot replace human interaction. You can't just get a robot to say, sorry, my bad. Like, even if you say it in the most nicest way, human beings are still going to see a robot saying it, and the company and the humans truly not acknowledging that. And I'm telling you, number one way to de-escalate somebody upset from a customer, from a company mess up the customer, is to listen to them and let them speak their piece. And that will never be appeased by AI, no matter how advanced it gets. It's just not going to. So to me, that's one of the biggest issues right there.
Yeah. Well, I don't think AI is going to have the capability to have empathy. And then again, we start getting into moral, ethical, legal questions. AI gives a piece of advice, okay, and it's based on all this data and things. AI messes up, harm is caused, especially on a large scale. Human life is lost, whatever. Where does the moral, ethical, legal responsibility fall? Is it on the designer of the AI? Is it the person that has purchased the rights to the AI? How does that fall? So it becomes even less clear about moral, ethical, and legal responsibility and how we're going to deal with that. And we're talking about our court systems already are overloaded to the point that people aren't getting their due processes the way they should. And we're going to launch something that's going to add to that situation. And so, again, these are implications I don't think people are considering as we develop and implement these technologies. And I go back to again, I think one of the best views of how this can go wrong is looking at the medical world today and all that's happened and the unintended consequences. Let's see, Sharon has made some comments. Let's see here. It's very frustrating when you try to contact customer service and you get that computer. I'm also guilty of screaming in the phone from frustration. I know it's wrong, but can't be helped when you're waiting for a long time for a response. And when one of my pet peeves in this process is when they just start repeating the same policy over and over. And I've already said that is not an acceptable answer. Give me an alternative. And they don't have an alternative because they've taken human judgment, human evaluation, conscious, and those pieces out of it. And I'm seeing that get worse quickly with this advance. Let's see. So how can we approach this? What do we need to do to keep from making the same mistakes that we've made in other so-called advances?
I think honestly, it's what we've already talked about. I think the tagline for the show is just because you can't doesn't mean you should. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And approaching that from a standpoint of all experts, not just tech experts, not just financial experts, but the human experts, the government experts, the agencies that support people, and they're going to have a big influx on employment agency, all that kind of stuff. Looking at it from a global standpoint and seeing how's, maybe in my small perspective of my country, this is not going to be as big of a deal, but in another country, this is going to be a massive deal. And, of course, there's trade-offs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-AI. That's something
Right.
that I also want to make clear is I am excited for the technology. I think there's a lot of positive things that can come out of it. The AI can do certain things better than a human, like from calculation and access to data and just knowledge base of it, in general. It's just we have to be careful how we're going to be applying it, and I don't feel that we are. So that's just priority number one, is putting more emphasis on analysis of what we are doing, can do, versus just what can we do it for in the first place, right? Like it's the extra step. We just have to take the extra step and look around corners, as leaders would say, as leaders of humanity. We have to start looking around the corner from the human lens.
Human SOS is not a policy. It's not an attempt at a government initiative. It's an attempt to move people and to get a collective movement of people. And I think that it's going to take a movement among people, including, the human SOS movement could be that move to stand up and say, we've got to slow this down. We've got to say no, because by the time government gets involved, we're going to be way down the road, and the damage likely will already have begun, if not gotten to advanced stages. We as the human being need to stop and say, we've got to rethink this, and we've got to take it into account. And I'm like you, Anton, especially I'm kind of unique for my peer group, that I'm a very much technology person, and I appreciate the value of technologies. But at the same time, I'm watching how technology is creating damage to us, to cultures, to governments, to lots of things. And if we don't stand up and say, let's slow this down and consider it, we may be living one of those sci-fi movies at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary to think about, but it's a reality. And, again, another implication of this is the technology used in other ways, such as war, such as devious ways, countries using it to try to overtake other countries. So there's a lot of implications. And for people that are developing this to just say, well, I can do this, so I'm going to, is dangerous. And I appreciate that Elon Musk has raised his hand and said, let's slow down a little bit. As I commented on post on LinkedIn, I think Elon is beginning to pick up on the concept of wisdom, and that needs to be part of what we're doing. Because if we don't, the price that we're going to pay, and pay quicker than we have in other ways, is going to be remarkable. So,
No, absolutely. What listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about social media and how social media has impacted humanity has been
mhm.
massive. Yet it's been around almost 20 years or so, early social media, about 20 years.
Actually, it
Um,
goes back starting in the 90s.
oh, okay. So even longer than that.
Yeah.
But only recently, I think within less than 5 years, have we started looking at social impacts of social
Mhm.
media, at human impacts of social media. So I always look at precedent, how we've done things before, to how we're going to do things in the future, because we don't change as people as much as we think we do. And if we let this thing run wild, for 10, 15, 20 years before we really sit down and say, what kind of impact is this making on a human being and then the state of human being and all this stuff, we are going to be in a very, very deep hole. So let's not do that. Let's learn from our mistakes in the past or from our actions in the past and get ahead of this thing. That's what I ask, is that we start being just future looking and not just driving to innovation. Yes, as much as human beings, we try to make a change. It's the change happens at corporate levels because that's where the money's at. So we have to demand for corporate responsibility, not just from environmental standpoint. We have to demand corporate responsibility from the human standpoint. And that's what this movement is all about, really, is just getting people to say there's a whole lot of people saying we shouldn't do this because it's unethical. And yes, we may save a few costs, but we may lose a lot of customers, right? And that's what we've done with environment. If you do bad things for the environment as a corporation, it's on the news, you lose customers, and it's gonna, you get fined, all these things happen, and you end up losing a lot of money. I think that if we want change, that's the stick per se, right? The punishment stick that it has to come with for us not to go down the same path as we have before.
Better to learn by choice than by necessity. And if we're not careful, we're going to be learning by necessity because of all the bad implications that occur. And it's interesting throughout history, we've had things happen, and it's not until human movements happen that things change well. I think of the civil rights movement. It wasn't until a massive movement of people together raising the question, the challenge, that proper decisions were made to right wrongs. And I think that we're at a crossroads where we are now in the same fashion. Question is this going to move so fast that by the time we figure it out, a lot more damage is going to have been done? And I think that is a high potential. And of course, I know that people are going to especially look at me and say, well, you're just an old guy and you think old guy things. And I don't know, I assure you, I'm not anti-technology, but I'm also very much pro-human. And if we are not careful, we're going to add to the human misery that we have, and by making decisions based on the wrong priority. And I think you summed it up, Anton, talking about, save money and improve production, all that good stuff. But does that justify the outcomes? And this process has been going on a while. It's just taken on different forms. This goes back to, we laud the production line of Henry Ford. That was a positive, but there was also a negative to it. And we still haven't learned to avoid or consider those negative implications to a new form of production. And if we don't learn from history, what's the old saying? We're going to repeat it. And the speed of movement of these technologies is such, by the time we start seeing the implications, the damage is going to be much greater at that point than we've learned in other ways, because other things haven't moved quite so quickly. This is moving remarkably fast, and the problem is the consequences that it creates are going to happen much faster as well. So
absolutely. Yeah, we can wrap up. As always, just thank you to all of you for showing up, whether you're live, whether you're watching this on a recording. You help us do this all the time. Otherwise, me and Kevin would have quit 3 years ago. But the reality is, I just ask that you stay involved, right? Don't be the ostrich that sticks their head in the sand and kind of lets things happen around them and pretend like the world's not shifting and the world's not changing. Stay involved, educate yourself, pay attention, and then if needed, be part of a movement that fights against some of these bad choices that are impacting the human being, because every voice counts in this battle. Every voice matters, and your support and your help is needed.
Well, the old Edmund Burke saying, all that's needed for evil to abound, bad things to happen, is for good men to do nothing. And the last thing we need with this is for good men to do nothing. And I use the term men very generically, good people to do nothing. And regardless of our age or station in life, whatever, the longer we do nothing, the longer the negative implications are going to happen. So encourage you, be a voice, and even go so far as to learn about this for yourself. Dig into it and be able to not only say, hey, this is bad, but this is why this could be bad if we're not careful, and become informed with some of this. So thanks everybody. Appreciate you being here. I don't know. Anton, my sense is we may need to revisit this conversation from some different angles, because of I see stress just multiplying over this one issue, and something that we really need to consider. So thanks everybody. We will see you next week. Have a blessed week, and join us again next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Eastern for the Human SOS Show. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much.